Hello and welcome to That Tech Show, the show that reveals the magicians behind the magic that is everyday technology. Chris Coyier needs no introduction, and it was a pleasure to have him on the show. Being a front-end engineer as well, we were able to talk about CSS, front-end technologies, product development, and running a profitable business, virtual assistants, and of course, getting into the nitty-gritty of Codepen and CSS tricks. I felt like we could have talked for hours on this one, but alas, it had to come to an end. So here is Chris Coyier.
Hello, I am Chris Coyier, co-founder of a social development environment we call Codepen, and I've been writing about web design and development for a long time. CSS Tricks is a kind of a blog and video site, kind of a community site around all that stuff that I've been running for a long time. And I have a podcast myself as well called Shop Talk Show.
Nice. We'll get into all that. But as you rightfully said, you've been in it for a long time. So our job here is to try and talk about some stuff that you haven't spoken about or that you haven't delved into in the world of development. So let's try. Are you ready, Chris?
Yeah, I'm so ready. It sounds like you all come from you do agency work more than I have. So that's always a fun one to think about. Is I never really lived in that world.
So Chris and I, we've done agency work and we've run our own companies, all the rest of it. So let's just see how that goes. But my first question, I wanted to go right for the jugular with this one. How is CSS still relevant today?
Well, I mean, I can take it at the surface level, and that it's relevant because there are no alternatives. It's the only way to style things on websites. So there's not even anything gunning for it, really. I mean, there is things gunning for the web as a whole. You know, there's a kind of an eternal battle between, like, you know, will native platforms win? Because certainly you can make apps for mobile devices that don't use any web technology. They use, you know, the proprietary tech behind those platforms. And that's an interesting battle. But if you're talking about building something for the web, that's literally the only language for styling things is CSS. You kind of have no choice to learn it. There's abstractions, there's tooling on top of it, but it all ends up in the browser as CSS. And that's kind of cool. I lucked out in a way, having a website has that in the name, although, you know, the site CSS Tricks is in a sense terribly named. It's not. I like to write about CSS tricks, don't get me wrong. Like a good old CSS trick will, get me going for sure. But it's been long since that's all we do. It's really just a site that just talks about building websites and the world around building websites, mostly from a front end perspective. Although these days, what does that even mean? You know, the lines are getting pretty blurry in the world of what's front end and back end and what anymore. But yeah, CSS, the language is entirely relevant, you know.
I totally agree. I guess I've met a lot of engineers and developers who have had a weird, strange relationship with CSS. A lot of them don't like it. They don't like CSS, and which is kind of weird. And we'll probably get into this idea of front end being a very UI designery type of thing, you know, way back when in the 90s, into more of an engineering role now. But I find a lot of engineers, they're resorting to using things like Tailwind and Bootstrap and all these libraries that basically inevitably help them avoid writing CSS. And I'm just super curious, one, if you've experienced that yourself, and where this has come from, really, this idea that I just know tons of people who just do not like writing CSS.
I mean, certainly if you are on Twitter, you've heard those battles. I mean, it's probably the top front-end development battle, is, you know, or the thing that bubbles up to the surface so often is exactly how you put it. You know, people just, one little tweet about somebody not liking CSS and it can turn into a whole ball of worms with them getting dunked on for even having that opinion, which feels a bit silly. It feels like there's a lot of, for lack of a better word, sensitivity on both sides of that it feels a little bit silly to me after you've seen that fight play out 15 times, you know. But there's the squabbling and then there's like reality. Like there is a lot of like, as you say, there's people that, for example, reach for Tailwind. And I think you put it as a way to avoid learning CSS. I think there's some truth to that, but that you're useless in Tailwind if you don't understand CSS at all. But what I think it offers is some guardrails that CSS doesn't. You know, I think I heard somebody describe Tailwind specifically as in the like the utility library approach as like bumper bowling for styling websites, because you get, you know, there's predetermined sizes, there's predetermined colors, there's predetermined layouts. You pick from these, whereas CSS has no guardrails at all. You do whatever you want, right? So I think the appeal of it is that, like, if I use these predetermined things, how that page is going to end up is maybe pretty nice. You know, it's going to feel cohesive with the rest of the thing that I'm building. And that's appealing. It's almost more about those guardrails than it is about the syntax and usage of the tool that you've picked.
Why is it you think that nothing's challenged CSS? Because I mean, this might be a silly question, because like you could ask the same question about HTML. Why has nothing challenged HTML? But again, it all compiles down to that. But why has there not been any sort of challenges in the last sort of 30 years almost?
Yeah, long time, isn't it? Wouldn't it be cool to see? But yeah, not even a whiff of one, I don't think. And in fact, the rare glimpses of a whiff I've seen of them, they're almost like comedically bad. And I think part of it is because it's a super, super, super hard problem that there's no incentive to do much about. Like what we have, especially lately, has gotten so good that's like, it's not worth throwing away, especially once you kind of dig into the details. Like, what could you do better here? I think it would be hard to do better than CSS is already doing. Like, it's a pretty good language. It's pretty powerful. You can do a lot of stuff with it. What's the incentive for doing it? It's almost like the browser itself. It's like, why aren't there browser startups? You know, there's forks of existing browsers. I mean, you know, you can look at stuff like Brave or whatever. That's like basically a fork of Chrome that adds additional features on top of it. I think that kind of thing has potential to be a business. But to write a browser from ground up, why? It's like, what's the business model? They're already all open source. So your model could be closed source, but then like you're not benefiting then from this big open source model. And browsers are so complicated and the security is so paramount to it's just like there's no incentive to do it. So when there's no incentive, it doesn't get done.
Why do you think people struggle with CSS then? Because we've spoken, you know, from my experience, I've mentioned that a lot of people resort to these frameworks and things like that because they don't want to write CSS and maybe they don't understand enough about it, because you can write center align class or whatever that is, and all of a sudden it's got flex and justify and align content and all the rest of it. Why do you think people do struggle with CSS? Is it a paradigm of the way it's scoped or anything like that? That's
probably part of it. When you think, I like that way of framing it, that it's the scope. There is no real scoping in CSS, not yet, not really. If you type P and open curly brace, close curly brace, it's going to select every single P on your entire website. No, no exceptions really. So it's like that global nature of it. Every single selector is global. The only scoping is scoping you bring to it by writing selectors that match less of what you want. But I think that can be perhaps, paradigm was your word there, that's different than a lot of other languages where scope is very much like part of the game. Like you have function scope in JavaScript and all those variables, they just stay in there, and CSS doesn't have that. There's also this really visual nature to it. And it's almost like, I'm a little afraid of painting. I can't just go up to a canvas with literal oil paints and make something happen. I just don't have any aptitude for that at the moment. And I think maybe that's similar to CSS. I happen to know those tools well enough so that I can approach a blank canvas in CSS, but only through lots of practice does it feel good using those tools to kind of paint a screen. There's some aspect of that, and it's different levels too. I think that absolutely from scratch CSS work is a little different. like that type of CSS work that's like, here's a comp in Figma, check it out. You have nothing. You have no HTML, you have no CSS, nothing. Make that happen. That can be like extra daunting. That's like, I don't even know where to start. How do I even think about this? Like, that is different than now it's done. It's been in production for 2 years. What I really need to do is make like a variation of this card component. I think that's easier, that there's already this existing structure and tooling set up, and I can kind of copy and paste a few things or change some existing settings. That type of CSS work is like less hard, you know. But you're right. It is interesting to dig into that. Like, what makes people feel so viscerally against it? You know, there's like a joke, a Twitter joke. Thomas Fuchs, I think, did it first, where CSS walks into a bar and kicks over a bar, and the bar stool falls over in another bar or something. Oh, I just slaughtered the joke. But the idea is that you write. You write one line of CSS and it has these consequences that you just were like, why did that happen? Oh my God, it feels so illogical. You know, that era will simmer down over a while. It used to be, you know, it would be more understandable to hate on CSS because of how many like hacks there are for it. And hacks were the right word. You're doing things that you just had to do, even though that's not why it was designed. You're using whatever clear fix hacks and stuff just so that some columns didn't collapse on each other. Whoa, you just had to know that. You had to just be taught this really weird thing. It's like, oh, you got to go over to the jukebox and hit it with your hand in order to make it work. Is that kind of crap. But CSS has evolved a long time since then. I mean, most developers entering the field now aren't floating columns next to each other to make it. They're using Flexbox and Grid and stuff because that stuff is universally supported these days, and it's much more learnable. It's like it has evolved to this system of like, you can teach this and it makes sense as a sensical system, and it gets better all the time. I mean, much newer than things like Flexbox and Grid are logical properties, that these ideas that this is the top of the box, so it's called block start, and this is the bottom of the box, and it's called block end. And those things don't change when, for example, the writing mode changes. Left doesn't turn to right; it's still just the end of the block. Like these type of logical things that have happened that, if you didn't come up with them, might feel a little weird, and they do to me still. But if you learned that from scratch as part of the system, you'd be like, oh, that makes sense.
When you said CSS tricks, I was like, it kind of made, like, hacks is the first word that kind of came up. I'm probably nicking Chris's question here, but was that the kind of impetus behind CSS tricks? Is this idea that you wanted to showcase these hacks or help people, because it was a lot of hacking around, you know?
Right. I don't think I was afraid of hacks. Like, that would have been a good post, is to be like, this is how you do. But I think I was more interested in, and still am, the outcome. This is what you need to get done, and this is what you got to do it. I'm not on purpose focusing on the hack. And in fact, I'd prefer to show somebody how to do something with no hacks. Just like, this is how you do the thing. Because there is plenty in CSS just doing things the right way that's still very weird, that you just need to know. I mean, just yesterday, I was working on a blog post about custom properties, which are relatively new in CSS. It's like a variable. You set these variables with 2 dashes in CSS, and then they can become whatever value you want to give it. And it's interesting. There's lots of things you can do with it, but I think it's still shaking out how best to leverage them in systems. You know, I think right when they came out, I was like, oh, I'll put all my colors in this, and that means I don't have to use Sass for because that's all we are using Sass for, is colors or something like that. That's like level 1 stuff, right? And then it gets more complicated. Like, what can I do with media queries with these things? And how can I use them to like leverage variations of my components and best practices of authoring? And then there's quirks, you know? So what I was working on yesterday is I noticed, you know, people running into this problem with custom properties of how and where they're declared. And it kind of breaks your brain because variables can have dependencies of other variables, and it all gets complicated rather quickly. And so I just wrote that up. That's like a prototypical post for CSS tricks, and the blog post, it's not even out yet. It might not be out for weeks, but I called it like the big gotcha with CSS custom properties. That's a perfect post for my site, because it's like, it's not really a trick. It's just something you need to know about CSS.
Yeah. So with, I mean, you mentioned it's not just CSS tricks. You do tons and tons of stuff on the web, basically. How are you staying on top of things when it comes to, because obviously a lot of people would look to CSS tricks to be the first one to really cover some of the latest stuff that's going on. How do you stay on top of things? Is it through Twitter? Is it just experimentation, or?
Yeah, a little bit. And just the fact that I have the site puts me at kind of a conversational center around this stuff sometimes. Sometimes get emails from people asking questions about stuff, and guest authors, trying to write about new topics and stuff. But it's a hobby of mine anyway, so I stay on top of it because I find it entertaining to do so. I subscribe to a ton of RSS feeds from other people's sites, and I wouldn't say that we're on the cutting edge. We're not like breaking news for web dev stuff. If anything, we're quite slow behind. It takes me a minute to wrap my head around what the thing is and whether it's worth covering or not, and finding an author to write about it and all that. We're certainly not cutting edge, and nor do I care to be. It's not even the most important aspect of my career, really. In a way, it's just a big grown-up side project.
I was going to ask how important it was, because your site comes, at the top of the list when you're just trying to work your way through a web project. And I think generally that it could be on any topic. It's not necessarily going to be on the cutting edge, is it? It's usually going to be some technology that's 3 or 4 or 5 years old, really.
Yeah, we're really lucked out that way, but a lot of this content, through not necessarily planning it to do that way, ends up kind of evergreen, because the web is kind of evergreen. It doesn't change all that much. That some 5-year-old article about how to do something on the web, it's still how you do something on the web. Less so with articles that are heavy on frameworks. If we had I'm sure we have some articles that like use Moo tools or whatever on CSS tricks. Do those have value to developers anymore? Not really.
Well, to the people dealing with legacy, I'm sure it does. But but your site's definitely up there with Stack Overflow, I suppose, as well, in terms of in fact, actually, there's links across the web between CSS tricks and Stack Overflow and Codepen, actually. So I think you're kind of in there in sort of the developer resources. You're kind of right front and center. Yeah,
I mean, that's nice. Stack Overflow has, this is just a aside, but sometimes people answer a question on Stack Overflow, and the best answer is like, can you show me? Can you prove it? How do you format this date in a certain way or something? The answer that you need is code, but it's more satisfying to see the code actually working than it is to see code that you have to copy and paste and then hope it works or something, or test it yourself to see if it works. So that, I think that's what you mean, is that there's answers in Stack Overflow that are just a link to a pen. And then they banned it, is the aside. They said, you can't do that anymore.
Have they really?
Yeah. Well, they built their own little thing. So if you need to execute some JavaScript in there, which is fine. It's not a full featured app like Codepen is. It's just a little thing to execute your code. You can do it in that, or you can just use your words with the answer and link to Codepen. It just can't be just a Codepen link. That's what's banned.
Why is that? Is it a security thing, or they just want to use their own mechanism?
I think that the content is what matters to them, and rightfully so. What's valuable to them is this massive database of actual answers. And if the answer is there is no answer when it's just a link to a third-party website, what if Codepen goes offline? What if it's sold to somebody that they consider a uncouth or a gnarly competitor or something like that? Now the answer is gone from them, and the answer is, I just think they want to own that answer, which is fine. I didn't bring this up because I'm salty about it. I think it's interesting and it's valuable for us. I mean, the fact that anybody would use our app to answer a question on some other website is just cool, and I'm down with that.
Was that the plan when you started it out? I mean, or has it evolved into that?
I mean, kinda, yeah, because that's what makes the elevator pitch for Codepen kind of hard, is that that's a thing that you can do. Codepen can be a little place to write some code to answer somebody's question. But that's like not good enough, like that's not really a particularly ambitious startup investing worthy plan, I don't think. So, but that's not the only reason. If you build an online editor, that's one way that you can use it. Another way you can use it is, let's say you're an artist, you're a code artist, and you just want to use it because, you just prefer the social features of Codepen, for example, because when you build something on Codepen, it's a little bit like any other social network. People can comment on it and like it, and we track the views on it and clicks and stuff on it. So we can make it part of the grand algorithm of Codepen and make sure that it's surfaced higher in search results and things like that. So if you're an artist, why wouldn't you use this? Because then you get some of that, that dopamine available to having your work be provably seen by others. So that's fun, but is that enough too? Those are two very different things, but other people, coworkers, use it to pair program together, to suss out a problem because they like the little isolated environment, or people use it to literally build little websites and deploy them, because we have that as a feature. And so there's all these little things. Like once you have a code editor in the browser, as we do, the equation of what people want to do with that is a little wider in scope. And I think that's fun.
But what was the plan when you came up with it initially? Like, was it all of those things, or did you, was it a small idea that's turned into this big thing?
Mostly that. It was, I already had CSS tricks, and like Stack Overflow, what's satisfying when you're reading something about tech, like how do I do X? The most satisfying answer is to see it be done. How do I do tabs in React or whatever? I want to see an actual example of it. I'm not just going to trust your code dump, right? The way that I did this from day one for many, many, many years was to author demos locally on my computer. Just an HTML file. I'm just going to make the demo, and then I FTP'd it up to the server that serves csstricks.com, and I put them all at /examples. So it'd be like /examples /rounded tabs or something. And then I would link you to that HTML file to see the demo, which was kind of just how you did things back then. Here's the demo. So I could, from the blog post, could link to that demo, and you could see it for real. Maybe I could even iframe it, throw a little iframe in the blog post that has the example in it. That way I don't have to embed the raw HTML in the blog post, which probably isn't going to age well. And there's some issues with that type of CSS scoping to bring it back to the original conversation. But anyway, what I wanted was ways to put those demos in a less janky experience. Because I also wanted to put Google Analytics on them, because I wanted to track how well they're doing. I wanted to put some branding on the demos to say, this is a demo by CSS Tricks, and maybe even a footer or something. So what I ultimately did was with PHP. Each demo was demo.php, so that I could have includes at the top. So my 2,000 demos on the site could all have, if I needed to update the logo, I updated in one place kind of thing. So I was slowly building my own little demo app, but just terribly, And then there's other apps that came along that predate Codepen, like JS Fiddle and JS Bin, that are similar to Codepen. They're little online editors for making little things. And I was like, these are freaking great. This is the way you should do that, because then you can link over to it, and you're doing this thing that seems obvious today but wasn't at the time, whereas you're looking at the code and the demo at the same time. That was new at one time, that concept of let me look at the code and the output together. And those apps kind of innovated it, and I was like, I want in on that. So I had this kind of moment where I was like, should I move all my demos to one of those? Should I pick one? Just move all the demos over to it, because not only can I link to that, and it's a more satisfying experience for all the readers because they see the demo better, but they also have a feature where you can embed it right in the blog post. Or maybe they didn't, or maybe that came later or something. But my big idea was, it feels like a lot to trust one of these editors that have no discernible business model, for one thing, to put all my stuff. Because what if I move thousands of demos and do all that labor and they close or something? Fuck, that's no good. So I was like, I'm going to build my own. But like, especially at the time, I'm a front end guy mostly. I don't think I've ever once hand architected the data model of a MySQL database, like ever. Like, it's just not my thing. I can think about it. I could probably participate in a meeting and, be part of a team that thinks about those things, but that's not my expertise really. So I rope in some friends to do it. Like, how hard can this be? At the time, Ruby on Rails was the hot framework, and it was known for being able to spin up crap like that really fast. Yeah, you need a little CRUD thing. Sure, CRUD it up. So they helped me spin up that, and we do pretty simple processing. We put a code editor on one side, and what we wanted to offer, of course, is some above and beyond just writing HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. Sass is, of course, a very popular CSS preprocessor. It'd be nice to be able to write in Sass, wouldn't it, and see the result of that Sass. So there are some pipelines for code processing behind the scenes, but ultimately we smash it all together, we plop it in an iframe, and we show it to you. And I just wanted to build the simplest version of that app so that I could put all my demos on it, know that I can trust it because it's mine, and then put those on CSS Tricks. And we called it Codepen from day one. And we were thinking maybe it's just like an open source thing that you install wherever. So it'd be like csstricks.com/Codepen or something would be its little local install, but other people could install it as well. But there was like enough challenges. I can't remember exactly why we didn't do that, but we ended up, or maybe we were planning on it, but we put like the canonical one at codepen.io, just like, hey, we'll put a demo installation of it here. But then it had a login system and all that, we started adding features to this thing, and it started to feel like we should just have this be the app. Like, that's how web apps work, right? Where it became what it is today, even though, there's been a lot of journeys since then, was this idea that we make it available. Anybody can sign in and do it. And they were building stuff, but we didn't display what they were building to anybody else. It wasn't exactly social yet. We built our own internal dashboard that was like just a chronological list of every single thing that anybody made. And it became fun for us to just hang out there, refreshing that page essentially and seeing what people would do. And you're like, this is cool, and at some point we just like made that the homepage. So instead of it being this admin tool, be like, why don't you just have a list essentially of what people are making be the homepage rather than the editor be the homepage. And you click onto these to see what other people are doing. Then once that's the case, it's like, well, we should add a love button so people can click that, and then we'll know what popular ones are. And it's like, oh, we should track views because that's an interesting metric too. And hey, we should put a fork button. So if you want your own copy of somebody else's code, then you just click the fork button and then you got one. You just start adding features like that, and pretty soon you got a little social network for code.
That's so cool. Like, I'm fascinated about Codepen from a product perspective. So do you find that's how a lot of these features are coming around, through just, hey, we want a very organic way? Or are you a large team that has, user reviews, and trying to figure out what the next feature is? Or was it a very organic process?
Well, it was a very poor process for a long time. We even joked that we did Twitter-driven development for a while. Somebody would just be like, what would be cool? This, and be like, yeah, that would be cool. And then we just build it. And we didn't, or one of us would build it, and we wouldn't even really talk about it with each other. And that it was fun for a while and not a huge problem. But as an app gets older and older, and you start basically questioning your life, because you're like, this has been a significant piece of my literal life as a human being, like these technical debt decisions, because somebody just put in a feature they thought was cool, and now I have to support for the rest of my life. These are like they're not a joke anymore. They're real things. So you have to like start treating them more seriously, and then you have to go through re-architectures and endless meetings of what can we do here to simplify this, and is it possible to kill this feature, and what features have actual business value, they're not just little things, and what features are obvious but what features are really future forward looking that change the game. This Codepen's been around a while, and I think funny enough, those original apps like JSBin and JSFiddle, they're still around. They still do what they do. They're not that different than Codepen really, although I think we do a lot of things cooler and better. They're not worlds different. But along the journey, there's been next gen code editors that can do things that Codepen totally can't do. I don't think we're like the coolest kids on the block anymore as far as all the things that we can support. I like to think we do it fast. We're super reliable. We actually have a business model. We have a dedicated team. We have fast support. We have all kinds of like things going for us. But there are some hot kids on the block doing cool things. So we need to be thinking about like, well, that's not cool. Like how can we leapfrog things. We're not interested in just sitting around being what we are forever. We have to make decisions about what works for us, how can we take our experience and bring things to the next level, that kind of thing. But yeah, there's been plenty of bad choices along the way that just have been painful.
At what point did it start maturing then? At what point did you start sort of going, okay, actually we need to be a bit more serious and grown up about this and decide and prioritize those sort of features?
Right. Well, certain realities hit you in the face sometimes. So, for example, there was this is a number of years ago, but we could look at our revenue because, Codepen has a pro plan and we've had other minor business models. We've got a job board. We run advertising. We sell merch. There's little pieces of the pie that make up the whole. But the biggest one is our pro plans thing. And that always felt like the right way to go. Like I want to just make good software. I want to have a price for the software. People pay the price if they want it. And that's the business model. That's the most kind of attractive business model to me for these things. We run ads partially because everything is public on Codepen and most usage of Codepen is free. And there's a lot of traffic for it. Like you said, it shows up in search results a lot. So to like earn nothing from a free user doesn't feel as right as running a little bit of advertising on the site and capitalizing on the high traffic that we have. So that's nice. Maybe in a perfect world, we wouldn't do that because we'd be doing so well otherwise. But anyway, so we can look at our revenue. Of course we can. We're a business, right? We can look at all the numbers. And I don't think anybody would salivate at Codepen's trajectory over the years. I mean, just to be quite frank, I'm proud of what we've done. We have a team of 10 now, or 9, I guess, as of today. Sorry, we didn't fire anybody or anything. That's not weird. We actually gained 1, and we gained to 9, not 10, which is great. We're hiring, yay. But years and years ago, the problem I was alluding to is we could look at that, and generally it ticked upwards. And that's absolutely what it's doing now. We feel great about that. But there's a point where it not only got flat, but because of costs and fluctuation month to month, it kind of looked like things were going down. And when things are going down, that's bleak in a business like ours. Those are bad conversations because you can't run your coffers dry at a company, right? And just be like, oh, sorry, we can't make payroll, turning off the servers, bye. Like you're ruining your career after that. Like you've lost trust. That's just extreme mismanagement and misrunning of a company. So you can't do that, right? And nor do we have any desire to do that. Like we've always said that, should we screw up Codepen so badly that it can't operate as a business anymore, we'd still find some way to never kill those URLs. We'd find some kind of static way of hosting them that's cheap or find some sponsors. We're not going to like turn Codepen off ever, even if we really ruin it, right? So when you're in that situation of things are going down, then you're like, what does disaster planning look like? How can we cut costs? How can we right this ship so that we're either going up again or that we've slashed enough from this, that we've done enough disaster planning and acted on enough stuff that we're okay. Our runway is back to infinite. Infinite runway is where I like to be. We're making more money than we're losing. We're not a startup in that way. I'm not like hiring 15 people just to burn through it super fast and either fail or we don't. It's just not my style. So anyway, that's when things got real. That's when things are like, so when we're sitting around doing disaster planning, that's a sobering moment. And that's when you need to turn things around or not, and I don't think we're unique in that. A lot of companies have faced that and we've gotten through it a couple of times. And our latest round has just been really positive. It's been we're really tech focused. So maybe to our detriment, sometimes we don't like solve problems with like, maybe if we did better marketing, that's like almost never what we do. We do like, let's change the product, and in a way I'd feel okay about that just because of how high our traffic is anyway. Like we have a crap load of people sign up for Codepen every day. It's all over the place. We have these embeds, like I talked about. That's why we built Codepen, is you put these embeds on CSS tricks, but Google uses it. The React docs use it. The Vue docs use it. Smashing Magazine uses it. The MDN has it in places. It's like people see Codepen. We don't have a lack of awareness of what Codepen is. We have a lack of people that sign up for Codepen and then never choose to go pro. So to me, it's a product problem. And to us, it's like, let's fix the product. Let's make sure that technical debt is at a minimum. Let's have a vision of where we want to take this thing, and we'll get there, fixing it along the way. And that's where we're at now. So I feel just like this compared to 3-4 years ago, of a happy bad.
When it gets used on, React docs or Vue or Ant Design, I've looked at it recently as well. Use Codepen. Do they pay for that functionality as well, or is that part of the freebie?
Pretty much. Isn't that sad? The problem is, we face certain competitions. Like they might use us because it's free, and if it wasn't, there's so many Codepen competitors that they would just use one of those. So it's one of those things where it's hard to, like, it did come up. I mean, Google has this new course they launched, it was a couple months ago now, maybe not quite, but it's called Learn CSS. Now, if you type Learn CSS in the browser, you can go right to that Google course. Super well done. High five to the team that did that. There's over, 200, 300 Codepen embeds in the thing. Guess who's got more money than God? Google. Guess who should have probably paid, doesn't it seem like, I would think an adult looking at the situation would be like, what did you earn from that Codepen? Oh, it's nothing. Are you crazy? But, if I'm sure if we weren't, if we were like, I'm sorry, Google, that's going to be $100,000 for you to use our service for that. They'd be like, well, we're going to use the free one then, I don't know. It's tricky. I don't know how to confront that. That's on our mind. Believe me. But I'd like to make it that they choose us and pay for it because it's so good that it's the only choice to use. Whereas right now, I don't think that's the case.
Is there not a way of, it's obviously having an effect on your server, the fact that they're embedding this code, and is there a way of...
Yeah, charge them for the bandwidth or whatever.
Exactly. That seems like a logical way to go if you're incurring costs because of the amount of traffic to their website.
That's exactly right. That's my favorite take on this, is that there should probably be something in our terms of service or whatever that say like, yes, this is free accounts are fine, and then put some caps on various things. We're not trying to limit how much you make, but we there's already some limits. There's limits of how much code you can put in one pen, because there's just some database constraints that make it seem like that's fair play. But I think there's like a 2 megabyte limit for any one particular file. It's the same kind of limits, but why not limits on bandwidth? We don't have one of those, You could put all kinds of people that make fonts and sell them under different thing. They use it page views as a metric. I've seen a recent one where in their EULA thing was how many employees your company has. That's how much you pay for the font. So it scales up pretty high from that. But yeah, that would be smart. I just, at the moment I look at it as like, there's other levers I want to pull first. And if they fail, because of course we measure everything like businesses do, then it's not like we're out of levers to pull. There's still more. Yeah.
I was going to ask, like, you must get a lot of traffic from the React docs and various things like that anyway, to sort of to sweeten the blow a little bit when it comes to the effect that it's having, that, and all the rest of it. So it's
sure. And they're backed by Facebook. Yeah, great. Another company that's not exactly poor. Where we get a lot from then, though, is Free Code Camp, which is a really cool organization that has this kind of open source free code curriculum thing. They have a couple of moments during that curriculum that point people over to Codepen as part of their journey, which is great. And they just, I think the freeness of their thing, they just get a ton of students rolling through that program, and that's great for us.
Speaking of the future, then, not just the money making stuff, but have you got any? Has Codepen got any exciting features or anything lined up that we can expect in the near future?
Hell yeah, you do. Yeah, I mean, in a way, we're kind of re-architecting the world under the hood, and it's going to take us a while to do it. But for the first time, we have like what I think is a really cool, strong vision of what next gen Codepen is like. And it's just going to do more, be more, everything, and be a bit more pro focused too. You know, we're not in any way neutering what you get today for free on Codepen, but there's going to be a lot more compelling and obvious reasons why you would want to go pro. And that's the biggest thing in my mind, is that there's just not a lot of like moments when you're using Codepen where you're like, oh, I obviously should pay for this because I need this moment. There's just not enough of those. That was kind of our big failing so far. And we're not failing. We're, you know, like I say that because I run the ship and I want us to be doing better and I want to grow and I have big dreams, but we're a profitable, happy, functioning company. But when I say failing, I just mean what could we have done a lot better over time? And I think is to have a lot more of those pro moments, you know, honed in on moments in the software where it's like, oh, I can't do this. I have to upgrade to pro to do it. Oh, I'm happy to. That delivers me so much value that I'm happy to pay for it. I think the apps that do that really well, I have so much envy for, you know. I came from one of the startups I worked at was called Wufoo. It was an online form builder. And I was always so kind of proud of how that product came together, because the moment that you need to pay for it is so obvious. It's like, I need to make a form, and the form can have X submissions and it has these X other features. Do you need more submissions than that? Then pay for pro. And it always felt like a very fair cutoff point. And it was the value proposition was just clear as day. And then they got bought by SurveyMonkey, so I went there for a while. It was the same way. SurveyMonkey's amazing in that they're in every single vertical. Like everybody in the world needs to make a survey. You know, real estate and education and healthcare and everything. That's why they're freaking publicly traded. You're like, are you kidding me? This survey tool is publicly traded? Indeed, it is. But their value proposition was so clear too. And I think we don't have that as much. There's a few on Codepen today that I think are pretty cool. There's the like, I need to upload an image because I'm coding some front end stuff and I need a background image or something. I have it right here. Where do I put it? I need a URL to it. We make that process really easy, but it's only available for pro people. So we made the kind of the workflow really smooth. Need to do that? Upgrade quick. Now you got it. Rock and roll. That works out pretty good for us. But it isn't. I want to have a dozen of those moments.
I think before having this conversation, I hadn't really even thought about the commercial aspect to the things that you're running, both CSS Tricks and Codepen, because they're just two of those things that, you know, as I mentioned before, are kind of ubiquitous. They're available across the web. They're probably more akin to the ideas that the web was founded on, in a way where it's like, here's something I created that you can also do too. You know, it's more about that sharing side of things. So it feels a bit more like closer to that ethos of why the web was started, really, information sharing.
Yeah. Well, I like that. I like that most of it is free, that it's very sharing based, and I'm not trying to lock too much behind walls and stuff. I like open APIs. I like URLs that don't change. I like those early web ethos things, but I'm also like a person with a house, with a mortgage. Yeah.
It's very cool. Is there a grand plan for all of the code? Because there's so much stuff there. Like, you know, is that feels like a mine for machine learning, surely, that we can, you know, tap into.
We do some machine learning stuff, just a little, because I don't, whatever. It's a little above my pay grade, I feel like. But for example, these days when you log into Codepen and you're like a user of it, because there's kind of a minimum threshold of like activity before this kicks in, because otherwise we just know so little about you, because we don't. This should go without saying. I have no interest in like gathering data and selling it about you. Like that's not only gross, but like I wouldn't be able to sleep at. Like also nobody comes knocking for that. I feel like you have to be kind of black hat to begin with to even begin to engage with that crap. But we do gather some data in that metrics. For example, you're logged in and you're engaging with Codepen. You're clicking on stuff, you're hearting stuff, you're leaving comments, you're part of the community. That stuff goes into one of those crazy ML boxes, And the end result of it, all it gets used for one thing, and it's to show when you go to the trending tab, which is you'll see if you're logged into Codepen, it attempts to show you stuff that's entirely personalized to you, that the guess is that you're going to like it based on things that you do and like on Codepen. So I could see there's probably people that draw the line even before that they're like, I don't want a box deciding what I like. And I mean, that's fair, but sorry, that's what we do, you know?
No, I've had exactly that experience just today, as a matter of fact, because I'm starting up a home automation business and found out that basically we're putting these home automation things in like Airbnb type places. And we installed one last week, and a guest moved in and ripped them all out because they thought they were being monitored.
Jesus.
Oh my God. So what is the answer to that? Better communication or better hiding?
I don't know. I think it's probably better communication, because actually we're not listening to them or spying on them. Like, it's just so they can turn the lights on and off and the heating, and we know if they go over a certain volume. But yeah, it is that. I mean, I don't want to make this about me, because I can easily do that. But I think in terms of that people feel like they're being intruded upon or spied upon, you know, I can totally get that.
Oh yeah, I've had a cleaner come by the house, or had people watch the house and came back and there's like rags over the Google Home devices we have, you know, just because they're like, whatever, I'm watching your house, you don't get to watch me, you know. And I didn't even think about it because I'm just a jerk like that, I guess, you know. But it absolutely makes people uncomfortable, and they see a little camera lens just pointing in the kitchen while they're making a sandwich, you know.
Yeah, it is a bit of a weird thing, though, isn't it? Because I mean, I suppose, you know, years and years ago, you'd worry that maybe your phone had been bugged for whatever reason. And now we've invited the bugs into our house, and we place them quite proudly on our desks.
Yes, where the feature of it is we're listening.
Yeah. Yes. You know? At least they're open about it. At least they're honest.
Right. I don't know how I feel about it. I put them in my house. I ask them to set timers. I ask what the weather is. For my day-to-day life, I like it. And I've experienced zero downside to it, aside from the occasional, like when they pipe up when you're watching TV trying to like answer a question from CSI Miami or whatever. But that's about the biggest downside I've ever had. Not that I blame people for being a little concerned about having Big Brother listening to them. Like, if that's how you roll, no shade, I get it. It's not like these companies are particularly well renowned for their
honesty.
Yeah, indeed.
I'm reading iRobot at the moment, and there's a paragraph right at the beginning that's it's joking around or saying something around what will we use these robots for, and they actually say asking what the weather is and setting timers in that book, or something to that effect. And it's just so funny how we've just carried that forward. I forget when this book was written or whatever, but it's I do exactly the same thing. Siri is just my timer, unfortunately.
The number one I use is, and I can't do, it's not just listening on my phone. I have an iPhone, so I have to hold the button down or whatever. But I go, remind me when I get home to go get the mail or whatever. And then it does the geofencing thing too, where it knows when you arrive home and it gives you the message then. Oh God, that's so cool.
Yeah, just take some nefarious people to twist that into something, because Apple have released the thing now. They're going to be looking at your images to cross-reference them with a CSAM or something like that. So now that's the next thing that's called ruffling a few feathers, because that in essence means they're scanning all your photos just to check. I
tried to read up on this as best as I can, and it seemed like fine to me, which and then I caught some not criticism from other people, but people are like, you shouldn't think this is fine. Like you can learn about this and come down on the side that it's worth doing, but to just blanketly say this is absolutely perfectly fine is like an under nuanced opinion about this, you know. But it looked like they aren't looking at the actual photos. They're just hashes of the photos, and they appear some threshold and something. It's like, of course, at the very high surface level, if you have these kind of pictures on the phone, I think we all know what we're talking about here. Very illegal, very immoral, very uncool. I kind of want those people caught. So
yeah, that's difficulty, but it's just, where does it stop? Is it now another just, this might seem okay, this might seem fair, which you're absolutely right, and I don't think anyone's going to argue with that because it's absolutely fair.
Yeah, and then what's the next step? Yeah, because everybody's already worried. You know, you have a conversation about, you wake up and you're like, oh, maybe I need a new mattress, and the very next ad you see is like, Casper, mattresses. You love mattresses, you know, and it feels a little uncanny. And it's like, if you're looking at my photos, I think the chances of that getting even more uncanny are really high.
And they're getting really close as well, aren't they? Like, I mean, I was having a conversation with my wife about a friend I had who used to live on a canal boat. I opened up Facebook, and the next advert was like, here's a canal boat for sale on eBay. I was like, that's literally the only time I've mentioned that. Like, how is that doing that? And so now I don't have Facebook anymore.
Yeah. And then, you know, I feel like the prescient question though is like, was your brain just primed to be watching for that coincidence because it was already in your brain? You know, and you would have saw that ad before and you would have just scrolled right past it and not thought about it. But because you were talking about canal boats, you know. That's
very true. That's very true. I've got a question on the sort of home assistant side of things. These things don't have interfaces. How does that sort of feel for you as a front end developer?
Yeah, interesting, right? I mean, I certainly know front end developers who have caught the bug for other nerdery. I'm sure y'all have, you know, you're into home
nerdery.
Yeah, but like, you know, like, oh, I got really into making, I didn't, I'm just saying, I know somebody got into making, what is Amazon's called? They have little special apps for their, what is Amazon? Alexa apps or whatever. You can code them in like Node, you know? So like, if you know some JavaScript, they kind of open the door for making, are they skills? Is that what they
call
they're
them, skills, aren't they? I was trying to think of what they were myself, yeah. Because you can run them on AWS. They just sit on Lambdas, don't they, I think?
Yeah, which, how cool is that? And front-end development is like, Lambdas are taking over, yo. Yeah, we run everything on Lambdas. They're great. Totally changed the game. And then the fact that you can then leverage that skill for this other thing, hey, why not give it a shot? Just like people get into mechanical keyboards. People get into Raspberry Pis. People get into Super Mario Builder. You know, all of us nerds have a whole spectrum of things we choose to geek out on, and that's kind of cool. Probably will keep us employable.
Have you heard my mechanical keyboard clicking whilst we've been talking? Have you?
Yeah. What do you got?
I've got this Durgod thing.
Oh yeah. That's great.
I like it a lot, actually.
Like classy keycaps. What'd you go with? The cherry reds?
I think they are cherry red. Yeah, I think it was.
Nerdery.
It was a difficult. I nearly bought the thing off Amazon that was like, here is a little sample.
Oh, I got one of those.
Of all of your different. Have you got one?
Yeah. I got that because I'm not into this. I'm trying to observe other people's. But every time I try to dip my toe, it's too deep. I'm like, nope. It's a lot. You can't be like, oh, I like the whatever. They're not cherry reds, but they make one that are silent because I would just prefer that, I think. And then I tried the other ones and I have some choices. But you can't, as far as I can tell, there's no website you can go and just be like, I want these keycaps with these switches and this chassis and this. It's like, no, I feel like it's intentionally not available. They're like, no, here's your soldering iron. You know,
yeah, they've set a pretty high bar for it. You know, there's a nerd bar that's been set, definitely.
Yeah, they don't want it crossed. Yeah, which is fine. So here I am bumbling away on my old Microsoft ergonomic, and it's fine. I love it.
Oh, is that one of the ones that's split into two?
I need that. I don't know why. I can't go back.
I haven't seen one of them in a long time.
Yeah, they're not. They're physically connected, but I've seen plenty of mechanical keyboards that are literally split in two. You know, they have like two different cords. Anyway, that is nerdery. Wow.
I had a question I really wanted to talk to you about because it's something I've been thinking about for many years. Like, I've forgotten where I heard you talking about it. You mentioned it and it wasn't really elaborated on, but I'd love to get your insight. And it's around this idea of front end development and these kind of two roles. And this is not going to be a new idea, absolutely, because I think this was like 2018, 2019, I heard you speaking about it. It's these two ideas of, you know, one spectrum of front-end developers really going heavy on this engineering route. And another side of it being, as we spoke about right at the beginning, the kind of UI, I call them engineers and UI developers, and this kind of distinct separation of the two, and how it's really quite a difficult or hard thing to navigate when it comes to hiring. I've absolutely been speaking about this for a long time. I'm wondering if you had ever got any kind of anything's progressed with that, or have you got any thoughts that you'd like to elaborate on with that, into why it might be there, where it might be going, or anything like that?
Yeah, I mean, that was definitely a big part of my brains for a couple of years there, because on my show, Shop Talk show, it started kind of with a series where I was like, we named the series How to Think Like a Front-End Developer, and then interviewed lots of people and said, how do you think about this job? Do you self-identify as this way? And then kind of, if so, what does that mean to you? And got lots of answers about what it is. And that kind of turned into a talk. And then more and more I got to this feeling that there's front-end people, which the word front-end to me still, that feels fairly well defined. I'm not that worried about that as a term, because it largely just means the browser, and that back-end developers means the server, and that's a okay distinction, and you can specialize in those places. But the browser has just gotten so powerful as a tool that what you are doing there is too much for one specialty. It's just too much. And that when kind of modern JavaScript arrived, which is post ES6, the big frameworks have fallen upon us, the React and the Vue and the Angular and the Ember and stuff, that those became so big. They're big individually, and combined they're everywhere, that they took over in this way, and that JavaScript is not optional, right? You have to dig into that framework, and that framework is JavaScript based, that can be your whole life as a front-end developer. You can know nothing but that and have everything that you know revolve around that world. And then there's all these people that kind of existed in front-end development roles before that happened and had no occasion to learn that stuff. They were successfully employed, they were making money, they were making their clients happy, they were kicking out WordPress sites, they were making craft sites, toss some jQuery on top of it. They were, making their little slider plugin. They're just doing great. All the while, this other world was rising and just taking over. And then all of a sudden they're like, oh my God, what happened? I'm looking for a job as a front-end developer, and it's absolutely required that I know React. And it's why? What happened there? So it just was a weird divide. And the other way that played out is that you could look at some of these new devs that sometimes very literally only know React. That's it. And it's not their fault. It's just they went to boot camp. Boot camp decided that's how you get a job. They taught just that, and that's all they know. That wasn't necessarily taught comprehensively in the way that developers were taught before, which is use a button, and the section element is semantically they just had a different way of coming onto the web, thus the friction, thus the old timers waving fists at the new kids being you're not doing it right, and the new kids being who's got a job, me or you? So I tried to paint that picture somewhat in an essay called The Great Divide, because that's what I felt was going on. And it was kind of my thoughts, but I tried to mostly quote other people from the podcast series we did on this and what their thinking was and stuff. So it wasn't just this is what I'm saying. This is what everybody's saying. And it seemed to resonate with a lot of people. And I'm not sure if regret is the right word, but maybe it is that the other sides are mutually exclusive or don't care about each other, or that, you have to kind of pick one or the other. If you're a React person, you don't care about accessibility. That sucks. If that's what you took from that, that's not a picture I wanted to paint. That's not okay. They can coexist. And in fact, that's pretty cool. In fact, one of the fun phrases that came out of this was the interview I did with Brad Frost, who kind of offhandedly called his work the front of the front end. And then he then also, by virtue of calling it that, there was the back of the front end, which meant things like the person who deals with the Webpack and the deployment processes and stuff, which can also kind of end up being a front end developer's concern, but not Brad's concern. But Brad wasn't saying, I don't like that kind of work, I don't think it's important. He's saying, what I want is to sit right next to that person at my job. I want us both to be right there, and we can both be front end developers, but you know stuff and I know stuff, and we'll Voltron it out and be together. And that's what I think is cool here, is that there's too much to know. So let's try to split up, and we can continue to grow throughout our career. And I hope that you do. And so I had this kind of imagery of like a tree, like a literal tree, like a trunk, and then the branches branching out from it, that like we start out with some foundational skills. Like all of us basically need to know what HTML is. Even if you're writing JSX, you're still writing HTML, and then our interests branch out heavily from there, that any two people have all kinds of different branches of what they know. Some people can go really deep on performance. They're reading those dev tools charts and waterfalls and figuring all that stuff out. And just because you don't doesn't make you any less of a front end developer, because chances are you know more about image optimization or popular interaction patterns or nuanced accessibility concerns and stuff. That's where we're at, I think. I don't think that's changing.
Yeah, I think I sort of, within my sort of sphere of influence, I think I came to a similar conclusion, really. It comes down to, ultimately, it just comes down to respect. And whilst not completely ignoring it, because that's, not my job or that's not my role or whatever, it's understanding where those people fit in. And exactly that, these people working alongside each other and respecting each other's role and know where they all kind of fit in together. And for the individuals to recognize that within themselves, to know, just like you said, there is so much to learn that it's, I was going to say it's not your responsibility to learn, or don't quite mean it like that. It's just, don't feel overwhelmed and know that there are strengths, because I know plenty of amazing, again, I used the term that I concluded, which was front-end engineers, which they work heavily with the logic and the Webpack and all the rest of it. They oftentimes they suck at CSS, which brings us full circle to my original question around this idea around CSS being this to this side of front end engineers. It's kind of not dying a death, but they just don't really want to touch CSS. Well, find someone who's more interested in that side of things and let them take over the kind of the stylistic side, the interface side, rather than the logic side. So I think I came to the same conclusion as what I was getting at.
I think that's really interesting, though, because I was wondering, do you have an interpretation of how the industry feels about this? Because going back a way, I was at Amazon. I think I left in 2012, somewhere around then. Web developers was seen as a different job category to a software development engineer at the time. I'm not sure whether it still is, but there was obviously a lot more respect put on back-end engineers versus front-end engineers. Do you think that's still the case? Because that front end is a lot more complicated now.
Right. Maybe that'll smooth out a little bit because of the just amount of responsibility that's put on the front-end developers and how productive they can be, to the point where, like, I think there can be like a solo entrepreneur front-end developer who builds an entire app, database and all by themselves, which was trickier to pull off in the past. Let's say, you need to build some CRUD app these days. You got it. Just some very basic data skills and you're off to go. And that's a big deal, that more of that kind of data responsibility is moved over to the front end. I think that's a big deal. And then that, just by virtue of that, like, this is sad that it had to come to this, but then that thus gets more respect and closer equal pay. I have no data on this, though, so I can't speak about it particularly in a way that matters, because I think what matters is, in just actual analysis of what's happening in the industry and things. But I do think that really like deeply skilled, important back-end people, like that's not like unseated yet. That's the big money, the most kind of dev clout in organizations. That's probably going to hang on for quite a while. And, this is probably somewhat of an unpopular opinion in front-end development, but I don't have like a huge problem with that, because in my career, sometimes those really deep back-end people are doing work that is kind of inherently they face bigger problems than I face. Like I'll get a ticket and I'll be like, oh, the alignment of that icon on that button is totally wrong. And I'll fix it and nobody cares. Like it's better for it. There's polish. It's like important and I like that work and it's interesting to me. And then backend developers will be like, I don't know, like we're losing 15% of our server power and it diminishes over time. And, we found out through detailed log analysis that, whatever, these things that are like, they're not just my lack of understanding that makes them sound complicated. They are more complicated. There's big, deep architectural problems that are just a big deal and that are kind of at the heart of what big, large scale businesses do. And like, I kind of don't mind that if you're solving those problems that you get paid a little bit more than Captain Me button aligner does.
Well, before we go, I have a little quick pop quiz that I'd like to ask you.
Ooh, juicy.
So these are just some things I've thought of, and I'd like to know your opinion. Which is best? Angular, Vue, React, or something else?
That's hilarious. Like I have any idea. I've never written an Angular app, so I have no idea. I've only dabbled in Vue, but I'm very compelled by the Vue feature set, how positive the Vue community is, how the leadership of Vue has its head screwed on straight and its direction looks good. So I'm very compelled by Vue, but I've met some, there's nice people in all these things. But I'll say that I think React is kind of OG on that's just was such a tremendously good idea at the right time and did a lot of the right things. And I like how kind of unprescriptive it is about certain things. And I'm a fan. I just like React.
Cool. So React wins then?
Yeah, React's the best one.
Okay. Right. Which is best? Squarespace, Webflow, WordPress, or something else?
WordPress, for sure. I'm a huge WordPress fan. So wild, though. Yeah. Webflow is in a totally different category of stuff. And so is, wow, that's fun. WordPress, best one.
Yeah, I had a whole, we're coming to end now, but I had a whole thing about WordPress, well, as I mentioned on the email, like WordPress, Webflow sort of thing, and the no-code revolution. Do you have any thoughts around the no-code thing at all? Is that something you're...
It's a little above my understanding. I get the concept is build stuff and don't have to code it, but I think the way that manifests is super different in different, sometimes it's like, can I build a process for my data without coding it? That's very different than can I build a brochure website without coding it? Those are like two different categories of products. But I think Webflow is really cool and compelling. And it's incredible what they're able to do with that software. I've seen endless cool demos. I've used it a bit, not super deeply, but even played with their database features and stuff. Super cool. But also like they don't shy away from what CSS is. They try to represent actual CSS in the product. Like it's called margin, it's called grid layout, it's called keyframe animation. It's like you'd be helping yourself to know actual CSS to use their tool. I don't think you absolutely have to, but it's like they're not like avoiding the knowing of code necessarily,
I get it. Yeah, totally. Yeah, completely agree.
Right, I've got one more. Which is best? Less Sass or pure CSS or something else?
I like Sass with CSS modules. That's the best combo for me.
Because actually, I was going to ask a question at the start of it. Like, all of this stuff has got so much more complex on the front end. If you're starting today as a front end developer, where'd you go? There's Webpack, there's Sass, there's Less, there's all these crazy things. Like, where do you go to get started other than picking something like, create React app?
Yeah, exactly. That's why, right? Because it's so easy. You type or Next.js. It's so beautiful. It's so easy to get started. One little command has some opinions about where you put files, handles the routing for you. Oh my God, why would you use anything else? It's amazing,
It's my tool of choice.
Yeah, and WordPress does a good job on another angle. Like I can just install it, and I have this website that's just filthy with functionality. I can do anything, and the plugins blow it up even more than that. And e-commerce, anything you want to do in WordPress, but the barrier to then get started developing for WordPress is a little higher, I would think, because it's it's a little harder to spin up locally, and it's kind of what's my deployment process going to be like? I don't know. They don't really help you with that.
That's true. They never really have, had they? Right from the get-go, there's never been a particularly easy deployment cycle, different environments for WordPress.
It's still largely SFTP based, I think. There's definitely not like a good, even my favorite WordPress hosts don't have like a GitHub repo to deployed WordPress flow, really. I need that because I feel like to me, it feels like table stakes these days as a developer. Like, yes, I'm working in Git. Like, is there any other way? That would be very weird not to work in Git. And then that means, okay, so I need some tool then to do Git to FTP to deploy this thing, because I guess that's what I have to do. Like, I don't relish that, but whatever, let's go.
Well, here's another one then. Which is best, GitHub, GitLab, Bitbucket, or Azure DevOps, or something else?
I mean, GitHub is the clear winner there. Although I used GitLab for years and years and years at Codepen because of their ability to self-install it, which I think you can do with GitHub too. But GitLab made it affordable. And GitLab, to their credit, has really nice CI that they built in. They were way ahead of GitHub on that. But now GitHub has GitHub Actions. So unfortunately, as much as I am rooting for little Team GitLab over there, GitHub is the behemoth in the room.
Yeah, the actions were nice. I'd ask one about CI. No, let's do CI. So which one? Which is best for CI? Would it be? I've forgotten them all now.
Travis.
Travis, yeah, you got Travis. You got actions. You've got
Circle.
What's the one I'm thinking? Circle. That's the one. Magnum CI was my favorite. I don't know.
Oh, was it? Yeah.
Do you remember that one?
The only one I really used was GitLab and Circle, and now we've moved everything onto actions. So at Codepen, we are actions, and it's kind of cool. It felt like a lot of trust early on because in a sense, it feels a little early still of actions. I don't think it's like as robust as it could be.
It feels to me a little too easy. Like, I feel like there should be more steps to make it work. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, it's weird. But it's built in, and if you're using GitHub Issues anyway, and you're using VS Code, which is now super tightly integrated, it feels like once they got the GitHub hooks in you just stay there. The whole tooling workflow altogether is just too nice.
So is VS Code your editor of choice these days as well? Then?
Oh God, another pop quiz question, isn't it?
Yeah, I could list all the others, but I'm wondering. VS Code seems to be.
What are the others? The only time I've ever been compelled to move away is when I see somebody use something like WebStorm or one of those like really like PHP fancy ones that do a little bit extra there. But yeah, VS Code seems like they got the stranglehold on things. Not that I blame anybody else. I know holdouts on Sublime Text and stuff that are like, it's so fast. Why would I, But to me, VS Code's smoking fast these days too. And
well, I've only got one last one, which is best, AWS, Google, or Azure?
We're all AWS at Codepen, and I think they're generally ahead of the game, and people play catch up to AWS generally. So you'd use the other one if they give you a good coupon for your startup or something.
Yeah. Absolutely. Well, I hope those answers help people because these are difficult decisions, and actually I think it's really useful to have somebody else's perspective on them. It's helped me. I know what I'm doing when we get off this call.
Great stuff. I think we should wrap it up there. So thank you so much for joining, Chris. It's been fab having you on the show.
Sure thing. Take care, guy. See you later.
Cheers.
Thanks.